Adjustments here. There we go. All right. How is everybody doing tonight? I was recording, so everything is a mess as usual when I record. I'm so glad to be here, guys. Welcome to the Wednesday Night Hump here on the Upstairs to the Right Music channel. Thank you so much for taking the time to join in tonight. I always am. It's really a pleasure here to have you guys always here. Scott, thank you, Scott. Scott's got a lot to say. I got a lot to say too. I'll get to that in a minute. Scott, good to see you, sir. Ben, how you doing? Everything's well with me, sir. Thank you very much. Yeah, I was recording. I was recording. I looked. I was starting to lay down some piano parts, and I looked at the watch. I said, "Well, you got 10 minutes." So I said, okay, maybe we'll give this a rest for at least an hour or so we can do this live stream. But that's the thing, when I get into my production mode, when I say I'm going to slot a week out to do production, that means that I'm really going to focus on it. And to my health's detriment, too, because sometimes I won't eat. But I do want to talk about production tonight. The Upstairs to the Right Music channel has a lot of angles to it. We talk a lot lately about the consumer aspects of the music business. And we've talked about some of the shady parts of the music business, but we haven't really talked about the production parts of the music business. And I thought tonight, as you know, I usually like to talk about subjects that are on my mind, so that's what we're going to discuss tonight, production and old production versus new, and some thoughts I have. But before I get started, once again, I want to thank everybody for taking their time. Time is a valuable thing, and spending a little bit of yours with me is really greatly appreciated. So thank you so much. I'm not liking the colors here. Yeah, there we go, that's a little better. So, yeah. Scott says, my DAW is where I wasted the most money. When it comes to music equipment, I use Cubase Pro, which is almost $1,000 itself. Then I bought a 6K laptop to run my studio and barely use it. Oh my God. I'm quibbling about the few $1,000s that I've wasted on my DAW, and you got me beat there, Scott. I never do any projects that are complex enough to use it, especially if I'm just making YouTube videos. My video editor, power director is capable of doing that. Well, I don't use the DAW. I used to use it to sync up when I was doing TV commercials, and they would send me the clips. I would sync the clips up with because you can do that in Studio One. It's one of the reasons I bought it, and link those clips up with the track that I was doing to make sure the timing and the cues were correct. But since I don't do that kind of work anymore, it's unnecessary to do that when editing, because what I got for editing is fine. Oh, and cheers all. Yes, welcome. Yeah, Mr. Watson in the house. How you doing? Well, guys, so I wanted to record. I wanted to do some production work. And honestly, I sat down here to this desk, and I fired up the files that I had worked on previously. I think a few months ago, I looked at it, it ended up being 5 months ago. I put down the basic tracks for 3 songs. And when I went to go find those tracks and start doing the editing work on them, they were gone. Pathways unrecognized. Now, half of that's on me because I didn't back them up, because quite frankly, it was a new Studio One. I had just got the new version because they make you. I'll get into that. There was nothing in it, and it was the first 3 tracks, and they are gone. So I stewed for about 5 minutes and got into my F this mode for about 5 minutes. I allowed myself 5 minutes of that. But then I said, you know what? I'm going to start all over again. So had to start recording all over again. And I did 2 of the tracks over again. The third one I'll get to. But I feel happy, of course, the second time around. I've had some time to think about it. I've played it. I've run some ideas through my mind. So it's all right, but it's just a pain in the ass. You know, back when I was recording to even cassette tapes, the only way I lost those tracks is if I lost a cassette tape. Should be the only way I would lose those tracks, you know, let's forget about the cloud for a minute, is if I were to lose this computer, but somehow the computer loses them. And, you know, and I remember the bass tracks because I had a nice Fender bass in that was going to the client the next day. And I said, you know what, I'm going to use this bass to record the tracks on this. And I was just dead tired. I was exhausted. And I still took a couple of hours to record those bass tracks gone. You know, I just, yeah. You have to sit back and have a laugh about it. But we're going to talk about that tonight. You know, I've been using Studio One for a decade now. And, you know, since the time that I started, there's been 5 editions that have come out. And although I prefer Studio One version 3, I still have all the versions because, you know, you have to buy the new version. You have to, you know, upgrade, you know, then to the next one. You can't just be happy with the one you got because they won't support it anymore. When I want to go back and take a look at Studio One version 3, I can't open it anymore, even with my key because it's no longer supported. Which means that if the lights go out at the Studio One headquarters, you know, all of a sudden, then you can pretty much well forget about, you know, a lot of stuff. And that's another infuriating thing is because I feel that recording in the box really has become a little bit of a trap. And I want to talk about that tonight. Now, when I first got the Studio One, really it was about speed and simplicity. It was a great one for people. I thought it was a great DAW for guys like me who track, you know, I track real instruments one at a time, but it's great for doing that, you know, and that's its real strong point. And I didn't have to think about the software. I could just make music. It was very simplistic, you know, especially the first 2 versions. Really easy to use. Not a lot of stuff. Fast forward to now, and they have a new version every couple of years. The menus move around, the toolboxes are renamed. I'm looking at this new version. I'm like, where the hell is my snap? You know, it's because they've moved it somewhere else, or they've buried some things. The plugins constantly need upgrades. So that was the other thing because I had to upgrade to this new version um, a few months ago. I noticed that I had to upgrade I had to go into Isotope, I had to go into Personas, I had to go into that stupid iLock thing, which I'm like, F you. You have to have an iLock account to open up a VAT, I mean a VST that you already paid for, but you've got to buy this iLock thing. It's the worst. Everything is going to this iLock, and thank God, a lot of my free, believe it or not, a lot of the free plugins that I've gathered over the years, those are the ones that I'm using now. Because the ones in the new version of the other thing about Studio One, it wasn't great in terms of any kind of mixing, mastering, or any kind of tools like that. It really sucked. You had to bring your A game to the table there, but for tracking, it was great, like I said. But so but with the iLock thing and also with Waves freezing me out with their we're going to a subscription model, and even though we said that all of the plugins that you bought, paid thousands of dollars for, are supposed to be for a lifetime, but now we're going to make it just damn impossible for you. And I tried, and I'm okay with that kind of stuff, but it was impossible. It was ridiculous, and not all of them were available either. So that's when I just said, F you, I'm not going to use Waves anymore. But again, when when I had my hardware, if the hardware failed, that was one thing. but the VST to get pulled out from under you, especially ones that you were used to using, sucks. So I just keep a separate hard disk of just the free plugins that I've gathered over the years. And you know what? Some of those are actually really nice. Some of them are actually now they're no longer free. I noticed on some of them, but I've had to resort to that because again, I don't want to do the iLok thing. So it's just a mess. Um, so there's that. Your old sessions start breaking, or worse, you lose access them altogether, like I just did. Matty Two Hats, welcome, sir. I'm on Logic and a M1 Mini Mac, no waves, no other plugins apart from free ones. Yeah, I learned my lesson. And it's funny, there's such an oversaturation now. There were a lot, in the beginning, there were a lot of free plugins from really good guy, really pro guys because they wanted to test out their stuff. Then maybe they developed a few of them and they opened up shop and they put it behind a paywall. And then you've got to the point where you have this oversaturation of plugins, and now people are resorting, hey, I'll let you try it for free, try the free trial on this, so it's kind of gone full circle with that. And I'm just sorry, we all have things that we're sorry about, but I'm most sorry about spending money on plugins when the free ones are just as good. And again, if you know basic production and mixing and mastering techniques, then you're good with the free plugins. It's really true. Walnut's a pleasure. Welcome, sir. How you doing? Your channel logo reminds me of a supermarket chain Spar's logo. Haha. It's big over here in Europe. Yeah, I know. I've got a Spar here down the street. I'm in Amsterdam. I got a Spar a 5-minute walk from me. I have to take a look at that logo again. That one is green, as I seem to recall. I'll take a look at it again. Welcome on. It's good to see you. Man, two hats. I just had a hard rule: don't buy plugins. Been burnt on too many of them. Yeah, and that's where they get you on the upgrade. And that's the truism with Studio One too. And inside of Studio One, there's Melodyne. Oh, we package Melodyne in with your Studio One, but it's not a full Melodyne. It's a super limited version of it. Whereas I used to have on the version 5, I had the full version. When I had to move over to this one, I no longer had access to the full version anymore. I shit you not. So, I use Melodyne a lot when I want to quickly take tracks that I've recorded a bass line and render it so that I can turn it into MIDI, so that I can trigger some other instruments on it just to give a little bit of depth. That's a production trick that I use. That's another great thing about Studio One. It's easy to do things like that. It's great for recording and editing. It's lousy for mixing and mastering unless you bring your own mixing and mastering tools to it, which thank God I have. So yeah, I got the same hard rule myself, Matty. I won't do it anymore. I won't do it. There's one I want. I'm looking for a good noise reduction plugin. I had a great one. And they went behind a paywall, and I lost it. And when I went back to see if they still had it for free, it's no longer available like that. So I need a noise, just an overall noise gate. Because I hate the Personas one. That's the only real thing that I'm missing in my arsenal right now. Is it raining there, Mike? I have a bit of background noise tonight. Yeah, what you're hearing is my computer. It's been working overtime. I think, you know what? I'm going to give it a rest because we don't need this screen behind me. And that's just, how is that? Is that better? Well, it's going to go on for a minute. Actually, I can't completely turn it off because I need my notes. I hope it's not too bad, guys. So there's that. Actually, let me try something here. Okay, all good, like an ASMR waterfall. I'm not trying to do this like that. Anyway, so why I try to see if I can take this noise away here in the background, guys. I just really just found myself in a situation where I absolutely could not stand um recording to Studio One. I dread it. And oh, thank you, Maddie. And one of the reasons I dread it. There we go. One of the reasons I really dread it is because I have a production flow. When I sit down, I want to get started because the ideas are going. The ideas are going. I've listened to some music, um, other people's music, just sort of get production ideas from, or I listen to somebody talking about it. As a matter of fact, I was listening to a guy talking about Sly Stone's production techniques, and a technique that he uses is called hawking, which I use a lot too. I didn't realize that hawking is where you take a part and you split it up, either amongst instruments or you split it up in terms of left or right in the stereo field. Like for example, Bob Marley and the Wailers did that a lot. Like one person would play dun 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 dun, the horns would play that, and then in the next section the bass would play it dun 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 dun. That's hawking. And I said, "Wow, that's interesting," and that got me into okay, let's produce a song. And when I sat down here, it completely killed that good mood I was in. But again, like I said, I've spent the last few days rebuilding my virtual studio and recording stuff. I used the Greco guitar and also my parts caster as well for the recording of the guitar parts on this. And I have to say they complement each other very well. For the humbuckers, I used the parts caster on this song for the finger picking melody parts. And I used the 74 Greco for the rhythm comps and the solo, the guitar solo. And boy, man, does that guitar sound good. Sounds so good. And really does. And so when you're in that kind of a place, you really don't want something to interrupt that flow. I used to notice when again, I mentioned once that you don't see a lot of video of Prince working in the studio because, again, that was his thing. He didn't want to do that. He didn't want that to be seen necessarily, and I understand that. I'm the same way. But there is one where he's recording one of the tracks on Batman, and he literally walks into the studio. The guy hands him the bass. He sits down and starts playing. Track's already going. And I know he had to stage that because when guy handed him the bass and he sat down and started playing, he was right on the one, and I was like, oh gosh. But that's how it is, kind of. I want to sit down and I want to start recording. In my studio in Singapore, I had the mics. I only had three mics on the drums, but I had that constantly mic'd and ready to go. I had my amp always set up and ready to go with that mic'd, you know, and that's how I kind of operated. And since I've moved here, I've had to move more into the box. Actually, 100% in the box. I can't do the drum things that I want to do anymore live with a drum set. I can't do things with amps anymore that I want to do. So it's forced me into the box. But honestly speaking, the limitations are starting to show. Prince all time underrated guitar hero. Yeah, yeah, he's one of them. There's a lot of them out there. We just. Oh, by the way, I'd be remiss to say tonight that there's another artist, by the way, that I'm going to finish this live stream talking about tonight that passed away. We talked about Sly. Speaking of Sly, last live stream, we lost two in a row. So I'll get to that in a minute. What really bothers me is that you spend hours, days, even months building a session. And then a couple of years later, you can't even access it unless you pay for an upgrade. That's not a studio, that's a ransom system. pure and simple. You're locked into a piece of software that holds your music hostage. Even if, and if your files have disappeared, it's even worse. Um, Mike, at some point, can you talk about songwriting techniques, specifically nonsensical lyrics? um, Chumbawamba, would be my song that I would point to, that I would say that the real ridiculous lyrics kind of started there. um, no, that's unfair. I'm a lyricist. You know, the lyrics to this song is, there's something that I want to tell you. There's something that I want to say. Girl, it's just that I've begun to realize, and so it flows. It's a love song. It's a love poet. It's a love music, and it just seems to me that a lot of people can't write that stuff these days. And even worse, you have people in the genre of rap music that don't even have a GED. So writing is and stringing coherent sentences together on a just basic, premise is hard for them. So yeah, I'll get into that one of these days. Um, and that kind of, and then then that gets put out, and then everybody starts writing crappy lyrics. It feeds into itself. And the only places you're going to find thoughtful, well thought out lyrics are in the independent scene. And that's the truth. And you know when that when I found those files corrupted, just vanished, and it was my fault. I didn't back it up. But back in the day when I worked with tape, or even a 24 track hard disk, that never happened. I never had that problem, which is one of the reasons why I want to go back to. I'm going to get the DP24. That's I'm going to go for that. But right now it's not a priority. But it is something that I want to get, and then that's it. Mumble rap was key shift in pop. Yeah, again, like I said, again, the evil and the shiftiness of the music industry to create this stuff and put it out there like it's a masterpiece. When you compare it to any artist who spent any real length of time trying to put something together, and it's a complete insult. The music industry has got to the point where it's almost insulting. The mainstream music industry. I miss the days when the tracks were real. When it was, I still have my 16 track reel to reel tapes that when I used to record in a 16 track studio. I still have the original tapes in at my folks' house in LA. And I still have a lot of my ADAT recordings as well from back in the day. And those are all hard physical media and CDs and stuff that I recorded and burned. And those are all hard physical media. There's no guarantee, honestly, that any of this stuff that I've done, recently, is ever going to reach a physical media. And I'm starting to think that that's something that I need to change. So there's that. So I'm not saying tape is perfect. It's noisy, it's breaks, it's expensive. Boy, is it expensive. The 16 tracks recording studio that I cut my teeth in, I had to pay $20 an hour. If I bought a 5 hour block, then I got it for 15. But with an engineer. And eventually, I didn't need the engineer. Except at the end, when I really, really started getting good on that board, because it wasn't a complex board, it was a basic board. But once I really got good, he became my second. I was like, could you patch in, But all the money that I spent, I feel as though it was well spent because I still have those tapes. Imagine if I did all that in a studio and the guy was like, "Oh well, that DAW company doesn't exist anymore, so we don't have those files anymore." It's just it sucks. You know. Well, by the way, you're saying that's cheap, Maddie, but you have to remember this is 1980, circa 1982 to 1985. From 82 to 85, I spent a lot of time at Right Track Studio in Santa Monica. And at that time, that was going right. That was the 80s. And $20 was a lot of money. No shit. $20 was something. Yeah. I'm talking about when I was young, when I was learning. You know, I still have those tapes from the 80s. I still have that stuff from the 80s. Okay? That's the point of it. And, it really has got me thinking that, honestly speaking, this is just, it's a ransom system. They're holding your music to ransom in a lot of ways. And, I'm sure many of you have lost sessions to DAW changes. I'm sure many of you have been forced to upgrade just to keep working. And I'm sure more than a few of you question whether or not you actually own your recordings, whether or not physical, your recordings anymore. So there's that. Okay, sure, 80s gotcha. Yuki, hey, yo, what's happening? Random stream. How old are you, sir? Mizusawa-san. 私は58歳です。ちょっと若い。ね、若いおじさん。と思います。Oh, yeah, man. First job in 1990 and 1979 paid $265 an hour. Yeah. Hi, 日本語わかります。So, honestly speaking, it's really getting me to reject this. And there are a lot of options out there, of course, like I said. How do I know Japanese? Well, when I was a kid, I was walking down the street and this guy drove up in the van and he said, "Hey, kid, you want some candy?" I said, "Sure, sir." I was young and innocent. I didn't know. Walked through the van. Next thing I know, I ended up on, never mind. That's not how I learned. I spent 18 years in Japan. 18 years in Japan. I lived in Tokyo and also in Churinken, Churinken City. And yeah, long time. Anyway, things like Reaper, which is low cost and doesn't force you into constant upgrades, it might be a way to go. My Uncle Carlton uses Reaper. I don't know. Any of you guys out there use Reaper? I'm not familiar with it. But some of the old hardware recorders, like the old Zoom R24, although it's not perfect, it is stable. And you can record things on that to an SD card. I have one laying here somewhere, to an SD card. And you can transfer that information from that SD card into, if you want to go into your Mac and master or mixer, you can do that. But cutting the tracks, all the tracks you can cut to, an SD card, then transfer it that way. And I think that this is the best alternative out there, in my opinion, at this point. Sorry, Mrs. Hassan, you got timed out. I didn't catch what was going on there, but if you got timed out, there's a good reason. And a hybrid system. Now, 8 tracks is not going to cut it. This song that I'm working on right now is a good example. It's a 24 tracker. As you know, I have a rule that I will never record a song that requires more than 23 tracks. The fourth was always for a empty, but 23 tracks, 24 tracks maximum. If it gets above that, then it's not something that I need to be recording. But this song that I'm working on is a full. We're going to get up to 20 tracks on it, and therefore I really would need a 24 track hard disk recorder. So that's kind of one of the things that you have to consider. It's a hybrid setup: analog in front and digital just for capture. I think that's why I've been talking about it recently a lot about me, really wanting to get one. I keep looking for a good deal in Japan, and I'll find one, and then of course, something will come up household wise, and I'm like, I could use that money better spent somewhere else. You know, the problem is that I'm not good when it comes to recording. I'm no bueno. I cannot use the channel model and say I'm good because I'm not. I really feel trapped in this in the box thing. So I'm going to quickly record this stuff. Uh, I'm going to save, of course, I save all the stems. Stems is another way because I do have the stems to everything. So I can take those stems, and when I do get a hard disk recorder, I should be able to load those stems into that. But again, it's just again, it's workflow. That's not what I'm not supposed to be doing that. I'm not supposed to be engineering like that. You know, in that depth when I'm recording. It's, I have horns I've got to record next, and the horn tracks are 4 tracks, actually 8 tracks of horns. Just the horn section is 8 tracks. You know, so and boy, I found. And speaking of horns, I found some great horn samples. One of the good things I will say about Isotope is that they do have a lot. Once you get into Impersona, not Isotope, they've got a lot of great stuff in there. So sound wise, um, I found a great horn section. So that's great samples, and it sounds great. So, but that's going to require 8 tracks. So again, there's limitations there as to how small of a hard disk recorder I can get. So, that's where I'm at tonight. I don't hate technology. I just hate how it's become disposable. Uh, Music should last. Our sessions should last. You know. But for some reason, the tools that we use should make us feel like renters in our own studios, but somehow we do. And again, like I said, it's like, okay, I want to use Melodyne on this track, and I click Melodyne, and it says, please enter, your product key, and I'm like, dude, I'm in the middle of trying to edit, a section here, and you're asking me for my product key. Imagine if back in the day when I was recording at Babyface's studio, if the engineer stopped and said, hey, I gotta stop the session. I gotta find the product key for this SSL board before we can go on. You see what I'm saying? You know. It's just, it's ridiculous, actually. Um, so there's that. Let me catch up here in the chat, guys. That's me saying chill, only 60 seconds, playing 20 questions, filling up. Yeah, okay. You're good, Yuki. You're fine. Just a lot of questions. Slow down the questions, and you can come back. Um, we need a Jimmy Miller for the digital age. Yeah, no shit. I agree with that. Wow, Scott edited himself. He retracted himself. Mike says engineer on Stone's Golden Age Records. Ah, do you track live drum much? Mike? Yeah, I used to. Like I said, in my studio in Singapore, because that room was just a dedicated room just for the studio. You can check it out if you guys can see it in my old videos from there. And yeah, I used to do it all the time. Now, no, not at all. Um, as a matter of fact, I am, and my drum machine got stolen when I moved here, and and I didn't notice it till after I filed a claim on the broken TV because they broke the TV too. I filed a claim on that, and I was going through my equipment. And I said, "Wait a minute!" About a month later, where's my drum machine? Every time I've moved, from moving to LA to Japan, Japan to England, England to back to LA, LA to Japan, Japan to Singapore, Singapore to here, and every one of those moves, I've always had something stolen. I shit you guys not. And the guys stealing it, they know it because, well, he'll just file a claim on it and he'll get it back. You know, so my drum machine is gone. Pissed off about that because that was great. And replacing that is hard because it was an old HR-16 drum machine, if you guys remember those, that I had a bunch of stuff in it that I had programmed. But anyway, I digress. So this turnaround for these tracks, actually, I use drum samples that I'm triggering from my keyboard and loops. So I've got some good stuff. I have great drum stuff. I have the tools I need to make a great production. I just don't like the way that I have to do it now. He got fired by Keith for being a nut. Well, the Eagles fired their first producer because and he was, what was his name? I forget. He was a famous guy because they hated, they hated his sound. He was like, hey, that's my sound. And, if you don't like it, you can, F off. And they said, fine. So that happened a lot back in the day. Um, Anthony, how you doing? Glenn Johns, that's right. Yeah. Who was a piece of work in himself. But I have to say, he produced some of my favorite records, so what can I say? But he was nuts. He was nuts too. So you got a room full of nuts calling each other crackers. You're a nut. You're a cracker. Well, if we had some peanut butter, we could have a spray. We could turn the nuts into peanut butter and spread it on our crackers. It's ridiculous. They were all crazy. So in any case, that's my thoughts on DAW, guys, and workflow. I just don't really like working in the box, and I'm going to try to do something about that. But we shall see. Even my Uncle Carlton doesn't work. He doesn't record. My Uncle Carlton records to a hard disk recorder. It's amazing. And then I said he uses Reaper, but not really. Actually, I remember that's not true. He uses the R8. So he uses the Fostex R8 hard disk recorder. That's what my Uncle Carlton records mostly. So he learned his lesson. But when he does record to the computer, he says he uses Reaper. But I would like to go in that direction myself, but I need 24 tracks. So it's going to be a 24 track machine. And it's going to be the DP24 for sure. But I got to find it at a good price. Right now, they're going for around 400, 500 euro. You can find them. I'm trying to get one for under 400. We'll see. So there's that, guys. Now, change of pace, change of going. Speaking of old production, hold on a second. Yeah. So, you know, recently we lost probably one of the most, I talk about Prince a lot and how much of a genius he was, and he was. And then Sly Stone passed away, and I talk about how much of a genius he was. So much so that he had other geniuses like Prince and Miles Davis and others, quoting him musically and quoting him, production wise, sonically in a lot of ways. Especially with Miles Davis and on the Block album, that was inspired by Sly Stone. Oh, I'm sorry, on the Corner, not on the Block, on the Corner album. That was inspired by Sly Stone. And um, what's this, Mike? Do you know what type of synth was used on early '90s West Coast rap? Yeah, I do, very much so. I got called in me and John got called in. Oh God, I can't think of his name right now. This is really bad. Dr. Dre's cousin called us in because he didn't know how to program a Moog. He had a Moog and he wanted to learn how to program it. Moog was the big one. The other one was the DX7, still was a holdover, and the Korg M1 was the biggest one. Every black guy I knew had a Korg M1, including myself at one point. Um, where I worked all this 98 computer free. That's great. I'm trying to get there, man. I really am. I just watched the doc on the Traveling Wilburys. Yeah. How lucky we were to have those last recordings of Roy. Yeah, I agree. Um, you know, so honestly speaking, the loss of Brian Wilson is, I was talking about geniuses, but this guy was at the top of the genius, musical genius pyramid in the 20th century. I put him above Gershwin. I put him above, not Ellington, but yeah, up there with, not parallel to Ellington. I really do, because he has songs that to this day we talk about. Wouldn't it be nice? Good vibrations. These are songs that my Uncle Carlton and I were talking about, Brian, a few days ago, and he played with it. The Beach Boys opened for him. Yeah, he knew the Beach Boys, my Uncle Carlton, back when they were playing small clubs in the West Coast. His band was playing on the West Coast as well. And of course, being who he is, I didn't like those guys. Them boys couldn't play. I said, but Brian Wilson, he said, Brian Wilson is genius. He said, the first time I heard Good Vibrations on the radio, he said, I'd listened to it over and over again for a week. He said, I never heard anything like that before up to that point. And he was like, this was those guys that used to open for my band, back in the day. Yeah, and so, you know, I love my Uncle Carl. If I ask my Uncle Carlton knew a lot of cats. So if I ask him a question about any specific musician, generally he knew them or he knew very well of them. But in the case of Brian Wilson, he knew him. He actually, and said they were good guys, nice young, clean-cut guys, the way he described them. But that song really blew my uncle away, as well as it blows everybody away, even to this day. Catch up in the chats here. War on Drugs keyboard player was playing an old 70s Moog synth. Yeah. And also the Fender Rhodes as well. You know that song, she keeps on passing me by, that rap song. The Fender Rhodes that's on that track was my Fender Rhodes. I bought it from Reggie Andrews, and those guys had used it to record, and then they wanted it back. And Reggie came to my apartment and offered it. I couldn't say no to Reggie, so I said, "All right, I let him have it back." And those guys all went to drugs. So that Fender Rhodes, God knows where it's at. But Fender Rhodes was another keyboard. That's right. Wilson left a huge legacy. Yeah, he was definitely one of my favorites. Yep. Was that Still Wrecking Crew on the Beach Boys stuff? Yeah, it was a combination of the because the Beach Boys could play. Don't get it wrong, they could play, but yeah, the Wrecking Crew was on a lot of albums in a lot of ways. And when Brian wanted to do things, he used them. Carol Kane is on some of those records. Pet Sounds is a masterpiece. When Paul McCartney heard Pet Sounds, it inspired them to come out with Sgt. Pepper's. So, even if not your cup of tea, excellent teacher for songwriters. Yes, again, wouldn't it be nice? I listened to that song. I play it here right now, but I'll get copyright struck here. I'd sit here and go through it with you guys. Just how wonderful a song that is. Just God only knows. You know, I'm not even sure what key that song is in. I think it's in A. It's A over G. It's a weird key. Mike, Oakland Carl needs to come on your show. Yeah, one of these days we'll get him on. I love talking shop. Me too. We watch all the same channels, especially the smaller ones. Real people, yeah. I agree. I like that. I agree. Brian is to music as Yellow is to school bus. Yeah. YouTube is my TV. Yeah. Wards, you're everywhere. Yeah. Yeah, guys. I'm just saddened by the passing and within 2 days of two mighty giants in the music industry in the '60s and '70s. Again, that influenced so many other people. There's others, they're Ohio players too, but really, Sly and Brian Wilson play a big part with me from that period. Everybody talks about Jimi Hendrix. I'll be frank with you guys, I don't listen to Hendrix. I don't. There's not a time really when I'm watching music on YouTube, just like you guys, I watch music videos and stuff on YouTube, music itself too. I don't pull up any Hendrix tracks. And interestingly, because from that time period, because there were so many more interesting things. Not to say that it wasn't that it's not good, and I still love, like everybody does, Little Wing. I think Little Wing is one of the prettiest things. And the thing that was written about his mother, he makes it even more touching. But as a discology on whole, no. You got too many cats like the Beatles, as a guitar player, sure he was fantastic. But I'm talking about recordings. I'm talking about songs. I'm not talking about individual talent. And so even he doesn't rate above Sly Stone or Brian Wilson in my book for that reason. Eddie Hazel, he doesn't, Eddie Hazel was a Hendrix devotee that went off and made his own thing. And I would say that Eddie Hazel at some points played better than Hendrix. he outmastered the master that he was studying. God only knows for me doesn't get any better. Yeah. So let's just take a moment, guys. We're talking about music production tonight, and let's pay homage to a great, great, great songwriter and music producer, composer. That, again, for me, what do I take away from him is melody. What do I take away from Sly Stone is groove and production. What I take away from Brian is melody. Is melody and the beauty of it, and putting things in there, harmonic, notes and different things that you can put in there just to make it pretty. Just to make it pretty, because I like pretty most of all. Even my rock songs are pretty, in a way. I record on Tascam, mix analog, no screens, no digital. Yeah, I had a Tascam. I had Tascam 8, I had a lot of stuff. I've had Fostex, I've had Tascam, and I'd like to get back to it. I'd like to get back to it. Jimmy's pretty songs were my favorite, yeah. Yeah, it's his pretty songs that are my favorite. His dive bombing never brought me back from war. No, me either. You know. And I know in some circles that's blasphemy, but it's just the way it is. One of the reasons why I rate Santana over Hendrix. I was watching Santana at Woodstock the other day because playing Black Magic Woman, it was actually the whole set when he was on acid. And I was just grooving that. But did I watch the Hendrix set? No, I didn't. Interesting. I saw Mancuso Monday night. He is all that, in my opinion, bad, but On Point Show was awesome. Yeah. A lot of great folks out there. So there's that, guys. Well, I just wanted to take a second and talk about that because I was hurt. I spent the last few days just listening to Pet Sounds because some of my favorite songs of all time are on that album. I'm sorry, guys, that I'm not a Hendrix devotee. I'm just not. I'm not. I love Mitch Mitchell's drum playing. I think that Mitch Mitchell and John Bonham were from that period of time. Both of them, Eddie Cochran devotees. Did I hear that right? No, not Eddie Cochran. What's the drummer? Jazz drummer. Cooper. They both were big devotees of him, so their styles are similar. I love their playing styles. The two best drummers of the '60s was Mitch Mitchell and John Bonham. But I digress. Where are we at? All right. We were talking about the hippies, the hippie culture. And it's funny, like I said, when I was a kid in the 70s in LA, I would go down to Santa Monica, especially down Santa Monica Pier, and you would still see the hippies. LA, man, I don't know, it's not that way anymore. But at one point in the 70s and in the 80s, it smelled like incense everywhere. Now it probably just smells like weed everywhere. But there are parts of LA that just smell like heaven. I'm not exaggerating that. I'm telling you guys the truth. Those are my, because a lot of our oldest memories are through our smell. They're sensory, through our smell, our hearing, sounds we hear, things we smell. And that can trigger things. Like you'll walk by a house and you'll smell baked bread making it. It'll remind you of baking bread, back when you were a kid. Oh, that's what it used to smell like out of my oven. That kind of thing. So, it had that kind of thing to it. There was parts up there in Hollywood that they had some stores that were some of the coziest, nicest places you could imagine. And I used to go in the 90s on dates. And take the girls up there because it was magical up there. My apartment wasn't too far from there. Nice, environment, smelled nice, and it was just magical. But all that was a carryover from the stuff that occurred in the 60s. Now, we talked about Vito and his freaks. It was basically a 60-year-old guy who was bankrolling about 30, I think it said 32 young girls between the ages of 13 to early 20s to basically be involved in, and I did say 13, you know. That song, Age Ain't Nothing But a Number, Getting Down Ain't Nothing But a Thing, which ironically was written by R. Kelly, which ironically is in jail for just that very thing. But again, I digress. Back in the 60s, it really was, why, Jerry Lee Lewis married his 14-year-old cousin. So, talk about kissing cousins, man. Second cousin, but still. Back then, it was like that. And so, you know, um, these these people that were there were very, very, very dubious. That started the LA music scene. There was a criminal element. We're going to talk about that. So Vito was born in 1913 from Massachusetts. His parents had three other kids, and he had, from a young age, and we're talking about the 1930s, an issue with running in with the law. He was convicted of armed robbery and got a 25-year sentence. This was in 1932, at the height of the Depression. Somehow or another, he got away from it. He didn't get into it. In 1942, no, I'm sorry, he did serve that time. So from 1932 to 1942, he did 10 years. But he got released into custody, so to speak, with the U.S. Merchant Marines. So here we have his tie into the military. And he served in World War II. And eventually, somehow after the war, he made his way into the LA scene. However, a first cousin of his is a guy named Palekas on his mother's side, and it turns out that happens to be a first cousin to Bobo Rockefeller. So the Vito Palakas family is tied into the Rockefeller family. Okay, so there's always a tie with the military industrial complex, military itself, criminal organizations, or old money. So now we've dug into where was Vito getting the money. This convicted guy did hard time back in the 30s. Somehow or another moves to LA in the late 50s, early 60s, and he's got flush with cash because he was indirectly a Rockefeller. So there's that. Now, he established himself in LA as early as August of 1949, actually. And he came in to LA as an artist and a sculptor. Even so much so that in 1956 he was featured in the Los Angeles Times, Vito and his students, and talked about his Vito Clay Studios on Laurel Avenue. And it kind of goes from there. So I talked about and this group was the beginning of the hippie movement in LA. These were the hippies. These were the actual hippies. And then, of course, it spread out from there because other people kind of signed in because it looked like a good time. But the point is that the hippie organization in LA, as it stood with Vito and his freaks, pretty much was being bankrolled by one of the richest families in the United States. And why would the Rockefeller family be interested in bankrolling their dubious, second cousin? you know. So even the hippie movement was not organic at all. And it was set up to be the groupies for the groups that were being established in LA at the time. You walk into a club and it's full of dudes standing around like, you're gonna walk right out. You walk into a club, he's got 32 chicks all writhing around and dancing in miniskirts and go-go boots and no draws. Believe me, you're sticking around. See how that works? And then it goes from there. So even the background of the hippie movement um, really was not organic. So a lot of the people that he was associated with, like Carl Frozzoni, uh, joined in '62. In the early days, they danced to local black R&B bands. Interesting, interesting, interesting. So there we may have a tie-in with Rick James. I told you Rick James showed up on the scene around 66, 67. Um, They also danced for a band out of Fresno known as the Gauchos. All the dives on the Sunset Strip um, had to be created because at this time there were no white bands in LA yet. Remember, I told you that my Uncle Carlton was playing in LA around this time, early 60s. It's because all the clubs were down in the Crenshaw and the Central area. That's where all the clubs were, and they were all bands that were playing. However, there were a few down in Huntington Beach and some of the areas, but some areas had sundown rules, like if you're this skin color, do not be there after sundown. So that limited a lot of exposure as well. But again, by the writings in this very story, David McGowan is backing up what my Uncle Carlton was saying about the Beach Boys and the fact that they had to create. There just wasn't. There wasn't a lot of. There were some guys out of Fresno, out of Bakersfield, out of some places like that. But for the most part, there was no L.A. music scene. So these are the points that I want to establish with you guys tonight. Again, I'm reading from Weird Scenes Inside the Canyon. A few excerpts every live stream this summer. We're going to go through this book where I break down the history of the LA music scene and some of the people involved. And if you've never heard of Vito and the Freaks, I've heard of the Freaks. We've all heard of the Freaks. There was, as a matter of fact, Frank Zappa adopted that. Frank Zappa and the Freaks, remember that? So there's that. Hey, Scott. Let me catch up here in the live stream. Show me a great band. They have a great drummer. Yeah, I agree. My mom was a hippie. Dad was Foghorn Leghorn. Good one. Crazy what people got away with just a couple of decades with. Yeah. Shit, things I got away with in the 80s. But as a kid, you could do that stuff now. It was a different time. It was a different time. Are you free now? No. Not like I was back then. And some of them folks was a little too free, if you know what I mean. Mike says, I cannot find that book anywhere. Yeah, because the author, died mysteriously and the book is kind of got pulled off from places. I bookmarked this because I wanted to keep it. But I've discovered that even this bookmark is the only copy of it that I can find. You gentlemen are always more than welcome to take a look at it as well. So I will. Well, no, it won't let me do it. Sorry, I can't do that. I was going to put it in, but it won't let me. Interesting. Wow, I couldn't put that bookmark in here. All right, I'll have to delete that. It didn't work. Yeah, it's one of those books that I think was getting too close to the truth. And like I said, like that passage that I just read, I love it when it backs up something that my Uncle Carl was just telling me a few days ago. You know, there's an audiobook reading on YouTube. Oh, great, that's great, that's great. If you can find that, Maddie, link that in here so we can all take a look at that. Yeah, he was hitting too close to the truth. It's just like that guy who wrote that book about the CIA, and the drug trade in L.A. He died the same way, mysteriously. You know, he somehow shot himself twice in the back of the head. Okay, all right. You know, you all like to pretend like that stuff doesn't happen, but sure it happens. If they'll take a swing at the president, what makes you think? What is that Michael said in the Corleone said in The Godfather 2? I'm disappointed in you. If history has taught us anything, we learned that any guy can get mortared, can get got. So when you hit too close to the mark, and a lot of this stuff is, he's backed it up, and it's all true. It's all there, and it's, in hindsight, it's 2020. But this is what was going on. So you got the hippie group. The original hippie group was was led by a guy named Vito. He had another partner and a wife and 34 chicks. And this was all bankrolled. Thank you, Maddie. Thank you so much. Word scenes in the cane. Yeah. They're being bankrolled directly by the Rockefellers. Because, feeding 34 chicks, taking care of their, needs, having a place for them to stay, that cost, even in the 60s, that cost money. And so where was this money coming from? Where was the money coming from to set up his shop? That tells me that even by the late 50s, early 60s, this was a plan. They were setting things up in this specific area because they were seeding people in there. So there's that, guys. All right. I think that's enough for Wednesday. I want to thank you guys so much for tuning in and listening to this live stream tonight. Talk about recording, DAWs and whatnot. I will be back for sure on Sunday. And between now and then, I want you guys to take care of yourselves and be safe. And I will see you then. Hopefully, we'll have some more interesting things to talk about. Anyway, we'll see. Bye-bye.